Thank you so much, Paul. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Lovely to see so many people from all over the world. A big thank you, of course. A big thank you to the British Council for inviting me to give this webinar. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be working with so many of you. You know, I've been teaching online, fully online, since 1997, long before this kind of video conferencing was available. So it's absolutely, it still strikes me as incredible that there are so many of us from so many countries here together, and really, you know, relatively easily these days, so much more accessible than it used to be. Okay, so as you know, the talk is going to look at digital literacies. We'll talk about what those are in a minute. But first, I'd like to reintroduce myself. Paul mentioned that I've written a few books, and indeed I have, because it's taken me so many years to write them. I like to put them there on a screen just to show you. There's a new one coming out next year, the 50 Essentials on the right there, and also, as Paul said, the second edition of digital literacies. So digital literacies is something that I'm particularly interested in and have been for many, many years. Apart from my professional life, though, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself personally before we start. These are 4 flags from 4 countries, and these are countries that are significant in some way in my life. So let's see if you recognize these flags. I'll just pull up the chat box. Number 1 on the top right. I can see a couple of people there. Pauline says, yes, it's, yeah, number one is South Africa. Absolutely, yes. You may be able to tell that I have a bit of a South African accent. So South Africa is important to me because that is where I was born and brought up. How about flag number 2? Is exactly Spain. Yeah, people have recognized that one. Yeah, Spain is where I live at the moment. I'm just outside Barcelona. Coincidentally, I'm just down the road from Paul, actually. How about flag number 3? Flag number 3, absolutely. Yep, Great Britain. Yes, Britain. And I lived in the UK for, let me see, 6 years, where I did my first degree. I've spent 3 years in London and 3 years in Brighton. So you'll see that there's a bit of a theme there in terms of the sea. I've always lived near the sea. Cape Town, South Africa, near the sea. I live near Barcelona, near the sea. In the UK, I lived in Brighton, which is near the sea. And then the 4th country. What is the 4th country? Exactly, Australia. Yeah, okay. So I haven't lived in Australia. I've been several times, but you know, I always wanted to live in Australia. I don't know if we have any Australians actually here with us today, but yes, an absolutely beautiful country and one that's very dear to my heart. And I'm going to start off with a few things about Australia to see what you may know about it. So Australia, as you know, has lots of weird and wonderful animals. Here are 6 statements about Australian animals, and you just need to decide how many are false. So there are 6 in total. How many of those 6 are false? Put the number in the chat box. So if you think one of these is false, you put number 1. If you think 2 of these are false, write 2. All right, so Chia Deng says 2. You think 2 are false? What about the rest of you? How many are false? We've got 0, 3, 2, none. All right, so we're between 0 and 3 at the moment. All right, only 3 out of 6. I mean, when you read them, they do all sound a bit strange, don't they? So I'm surprised you're only saying 3, but that's great. Okay, I'm going to come back to these statements in a little while. When I read through this again, I realize there's a bit of a scatological tone to all of these statements, but there is a reason that I'm sharing these with you, and I'm going to come back to those statements a bit later. But before I do, well, I have a question for you, and that is, what are digital literacies? Could you put a couple of keywords or a definition in the chat box? What do you think digital literacies are? You don't need to write a whole definition, just some keywords would do. What are they? I'll pause. Social media. Using technology. Being safe in the digital world. Thank you. Yes, these are coming up very fast. using tools, using gadgets, ICT people have got, technology is being mentioned by quite a few people, technology in education. All right, well, here's a definition that I quite like. This is from the latest edition of our book, Digital Literacies. So you'll see that the definition goes a little bit beyond just technology. The individual, technological, and social skills that are needed to interpret, manage, share, and create meaning through a range of digital channels. So often when we hear the word digital literacies, we tend to think, technology, machines, tools, tech. It's far more than that. It involves interaction, the social uses of technology, and also being able to use a range of technologies for creation and communication. So it's a fairly broad term. It's an umbrella term. It's quite difficult to actually pin it down. It can sound a little too vague for comfort. Now, to try and give a little more clarity to this term, my co-writers, Gavin Dudney and Mark Pegram, and I came up with a kind of a framework, which we think helps define with a little bit more detail exactly what we mean by digital literacy. So I'm going to just very quickly share this framework with you. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, right? I don't want to spend too long on the theory. I'd like to get to the practical activities that you could do with your students, but just so that we do have a framework to understand this very broad term. The first kind of area that we identify is this idea of communicating. So we're using technology within communication. And the red words in this circle are different, what we might call sub-literacies. So within the umbrella term digital literacies, we have code literacy, mobile literacy, print literacy. Of course, print literacy is something that we've always had, right? Print literacy is being able to read and to write. It's one of the most basic literacies that are taught in schools. But print literacy these days includes digital communication. So it might include understanding memes, for example, not just reading online newspapers and things like that. It also means understanding multimedia as a form of print literacy, or sound and word, or image and word. This one here, hypertext literacy, I think this is an interesting one to illustrate perhaps exactly what I mean by digital literacies, because we all know what hypertext is, right? If you think of a Wikipedia entry, right, you'll have your text on the page, and then you'll have those blue words, which are hyperlinks. Hypertext is online text that includes hyperlink. Great. Now, what does it mean to be able to create hypertext? It's not that difficult, is it? When you think about it, it's not difficult to create digital text. You could do it in a Word document. You could do it in a blog entry. And if you want to create hyperlinks, it's not difficult to do that. You just select your word, you insert a link, and then when you click on it, it's going to take you out to another website, perhaps. So the actual technical skills involved in creating hypertext are not complex. We can all do them very easily. We have these skills. But that's not the only thing involved in creating hypertext. We need to think about how many hyperlinks we have in a document. So if we go back to our Wikipedia entry, imagine you're looking at a page and you're looking at a paragraph. And in that paragraph, let's say there are 40 words and 20 of those words are hyperlinks. What is the effect of that on the reader? Research has actually shown that it makes it very, very difficult to read when something is over hyperlinked, because you're kind of making these very fast subconscious decisions. Should I click on it? Shouldn't I? Where does it go to? Or no, I'm not going to click, I'm going to carry on. And at the end of the day, it's actually very difficult to retain the information in hypertext, especially if there's a lot of hyperlinks within it. So if we go back to our idea of digital literacies, hypertext literacy will include, okay, one, I know how to create my hyperlinks, but two, how many hyperlinks should I include? And what should I link to? Because if I over hyperlink, I'm making the experience of reading that much more difficult for the reader. There's also that, who I link to and what I link to is that of value. And another effect of over hyperlinking is that I look like I don't really know what I'm talking about. If I have to hyperlink everything I'm talking about, well, it just sort of starts to you lose credibility as an author. So these are perhaps the kind of the communication or social area that surrounds digital literacies. It's not just creating hypertext. Okay, I hope that's illustrated a little bit what we mean by digital literacies. We go beyond the technology with digital literacies. So communicating is our first area in our framework. Our second is this idea of informing, so getting information across. And of course, these are all very obvious, right? Search literacy. We need to know how to search for stuff online, for example, in Google. But again, if we go back to this idea of social plus technology, it's not difficult to type your search term into Google or whatever your search engine is. But what about the fact that you're getting back results that have been tailored to you depending on your previous use of, let's take Google as an example. If I search for, good restaurants in Barcelona, I might get slightly different results to Paul because our user patterns are different. We need to be aware of that. We're not all getting the same, results when we're searching. And there are alternatives to search engines like Google, which are capturing all of your user information. There are search engines that don't save any of your information. I don't know whether anybody knows any of these search engines, the ones that don't track your every move. One of the best ones is called DuckDuckGo. There we go. Farzad has put that in there. DuckDuckGo is one of the best ones. So if you're uncomfortable about Google, collecting basically everything that's available about your life, you might want to change search engines. Filtering is another form of literacy. So, sorting through that massive wave of information that's thrown at you every day. There's a couple of very nice terms for this. Info glut is one of them. Data smog, I like that. So finding your way through this data smog is another important digital literacy. Tagging and hashtag literacy and information and data literacy are again essential. The ones in this particular circle, I think, are absolutely key. And I'm going to come back to some of these in a minute. Just to carry on, though, with the framework, our third area is this idea of collaboration. And of course, with the internet, that's what we do most these days. So we have a number of literacies within that area of collaboration. And I don't want to get bogged down in these. As I say, I've got a book this thick on it, and I don't have time to go through all of them. But if you're interested, you can find them online, defined online. And then this last idea, this idea of creation and design and redesign through a couple of literacies, such as remix, which I will talk about a little later today. So there you go. This is just a framework. It's a construct. It's a way of trying to categorize, these things within this very vague umbrella term of digital literacies. And that's the framework we use. Now, the next question is, well, who cares? Why do we want to be digitally literate? And I think Howard Rheingold here has a really good comment. This idea of keeping up with technologies is just not possible. It's about the literacies. So once you learn to use a certain blog tool, you're most likely going to know how to use the next one that comes along, right? Nobody can ever keep up with the technologies. There's too much change. There's too much going on. For me, one of the most important skills, if we can call it, about being digitally literate and keeping up is that you'll find the answer online. If you don't know how to use a new technology, search online. There's going to be a tutorial, there's going to be screenshots, there's going to be a walkthrough. You can teach yourself. A second quote about why digital literacies are important, this one from my co-author Mark Pegram. Give you a second to read that. I think Mark's comment is really pertinent because it's this idea of learning that's relevant to our students. We're making the learning more relevant, more interesting, and we're enriching it by bringing an element of digital literacies into our main job, which is, of course, language teaching, right? We're there to teach language, but we can fairly easily marry that with a focus on digital literacies, and I'm going to show you how in a minute. So there you go. That's a kind of a framework for understanding digital literacies and a very quick summary of why they are important. Now, I'd like to go back to Australia for a minute. If we do have any Australians or people who've been to Australia, I don't know whether you're familiar with this particular animal, quite rare in Australia, commonly called the drop bear, but it's called the Thylarchus plummetus. I'm going to show you a photo of it in a minute. Here it is. So basically a koala with fangs, very sharp teeth. And there's a very interesting article there on the left from the Australian Geographic about how the drop bear likes to prey on tourists. And apparently, you probably can't read the subtitle there, but it says that if you have an Australian accent, you're unlikely to be attacked by the drop bear. So there you go. We're all in trouble unless we have Australian accents. And if you look on the right here, there's a number of videos. These ones are all from YouTube that give information about this terrifying creature. Okay, so as you've probably realized, this is not true. It's a kind of a national joke that all Australians seem to enjoy. They seem to enjoy, perpetuating this myth of the drop bear. This is a great activity to do with students, to get them to look at the image I showed before, to show them the Australian Geographic, which looks quite convincing, doesn't it? It almost looks like the National Geographic. You can get them to search for videos and they will find evidence, in inverted commas, evidence of the drop bear. So it's quite a nice hoax, even though it is quite obviously sort of silly. Patricia, you can change your accent to sound like an Australian. You'll be safe then. Good. Okay, so let's go back to our statements from the beginning, right? And you'll see that number four is the drop bear. So number 4 is most definitely false. And in fact, all of the rest of them are true. Would you believe they are? They are all true. So you can see how we can work with students using an activity like this. We could start by giving them a series of statements, these 6 statements, and then asking them to research each of these statements to decide whether they're true or false, and then get the class back together and they have to say whether each one is true or false and where they found the evidence from. And as it turns out, it's number 4 that's false. Okay. Before we go on to that, this is really an example of information literacy, basic information literacy. And information literacy is the most important, I think, of all of them, being able to figure out what's true, what's false, what your sources are online. Before we look at some of the other literacies, though, think about yourself. And on a scale of 1 to 4, how digitally literate are you? So number 1 would be low and number 4 would be high. And Paul has just pulled up a poll, which you should be able to see. So rather than putting it in the chat, if you could complete the poll, that means we'll be able to see the results. It's very difficult to follow in the chat otherwise. Paul, I don't know if you can actually broadcast the results at the same time, or do we have to wait? Got a lot of people saying 2, 3.
Yeah, generally you have to sort of wait and then I'll sort of broadcast it in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so most people are saying 3, which is actually fairly high. Yeah, fantastic. Good, yeah. Well, 57%, 3, 2 and 3. That's interesting. I've seen a real change in teachers' self-perceptions of their digital literacies over the years. And I think also since COVID, where we all got very, very quickly put online, teachers have skilled up quite significantly, really, in the last 18 months. So 3 is pretty high for an average. Good stuff. Okay, here's a second poll, which is almost identical. Here it is. But this time, I want you to think how digitally literate your students are. Again, 1 would be very low and 4 would be pretty high. So thinking of your students, could you do this again in the poll if you could see it, just so that we can get an overview much more easily with so many of us? I'll just pause for a second. Should be able to see the poll. I can see people are still in the chat, so I'm getting an idea here. It seems to be quite mixed. All right, Paul, shall we broadcast the results and see what we've got? All right, so we've got 2. We've got 40% saying 2 for their students. Interesting. So your students are a little less digitally literate than you. That is interesting. When I've done this before with teachers, it's almost invariably the other way around. The teachers tend to think that their students are more digitally literate, especially if they're teaching younger students. But it's interesting that you think, you know, that yours are less digitally literate. Thank you for doing that. That's extremely interesting. Okay, so I just want to very quickly summarize the results of an interesting study that was carried out in 2013. Now, admittedly, this was a long time ago, but it was carried out with 60,000 students who were aged 13 to 14, which is about grade, what is that, grades 8, I think. So 60,000 students in 3,300 schools across 21 countries. So a really huge study into digital literacies. The study was trying to see how digitally literate this age group, 13 to 14, are across this really huge, you know, sample population. So there were 60,000 students, as I said, and there were also 25,000 teachers and school principals and ICT coordinators involved in the study. It was interestingly designed because instead of getting students to do what I just did with you, which is not very reliable, the students had to carry out a practical task that would actually show whether they were digitally literate or not. And there were 4 tasks, and the tasks were randomly assigned to students. So there were a range of these. And again, each task was scored from 1 to 4. So 1 would be the lowest literacy that was exhibited, to 4, which would be the highest literacy. Where do you think the majority were? What level? I mean, you've just told me your level of students is about 2, but in this study of 60,000 students, where do you think the average was between 1 and 4? 1 the lowest, 4 the highest. All right, we've got some 3s, we've got some 2s, 4s, 2s. Okay, we've got pretty much every number there. All right, well, interestingly, the majority, so 81% of these 60,000 students was between levels 1 and 3, so not level 4. And then the majority within that were at number 2, which quite a few of you have identified and actually matches exactly what you just said about your own students. Yeah, so students are not that digitally literate. This was an interesting study as well, carried out more recently, 2016. It was, you may even have heard of it because I saw it in newspapers, I heard about it on the radio at the time. It was carried out by Weinberg et al. From Stanford University in the USA. And they looked specifically at the context in the US, where you would expect students to be slightly more digitally literate because they have more access, right, to technology. So in this case, they looked at middle school and high school and university students across 12 states within the USA. And in total, they got just under 8,000 students involved in this study. What they found was interesting, and that was, as the headline there says, that the students were really not very good at spotting what was true and what was not online. So most likely they would have believed all of the stuff about the drop bear that I just told you. They didn't use the drop bear, by the way, in the study, but from the results, it seems that they tend to believe what they see online. What's interesting as well is that if there is an image, and especially if there is a video involved, then these students believed it more. If it was just text-based, they sort of believed it, but if it was backed up by images or by video, then they tended to believe it more. So you'll see the drop bear, for example, has some images and it also has some video. So I guess they would have really fallen for that one. That's an interesting thing, and it has some interesting repercussions for this wave of kind of fake news that seems to be washing over the internet at the moment. Okay, so 2 studies that are worth looking at. I think the lesson to be learned here for students is that you need to triangulate and verify your sources. In other words, look at least 3 different sources and see where they're coming from. So the Australian Geographic, who are these people? Who are they? What is this publication? Well, of course, it's a fake publication. So being able to question a little bit what you're seeing online is absolutely essential. It's the first step in information literacy and has become, I think one of the most pressing issues of our time. I don't think I exaggerate when we look at what's happening online at the moment. I want to just quickly talk about COVID because there has been so much misinformation about it over the last 18 months. And it's a really interesting case study of just how information literacy is essential in this day and age. You've probably had experiences of this yourself during the COVID time. I just want to share 3 pieces of information from various online sources. On the top right-hand side is a WhatsApp audio message. Now, this is my personal WhatsApp account, and this is from a friend of mine who lives near me here in Spain. She sent me, you can see here, this is a forwarded audio message. So obviously it's not her, she's sending me an audio message from somewhere else. And I clicked on this audio message and listened to it. And it was a person talking about how it said something like, a doctor, I don't know who, a doctor in South Korea has said they have found that if you want to know if you have COVID, you just need to try and hold your breath for, I think it was like 30 seconds or something. If you don't cough or it doesn't hurt in any way, then you don't have COVID. All right. And of course, when you hear that, you immediately want to hold your breath just to check. It turned out to be not true, and it was circulated on social media. So through personal social media accounts very, very widely. You may have received that exact message yourself. Apparently it got all over the world. If you did hear that one, just put yes in the chat box, by the way. So that was an interesting one. But that was, when I listened to it, I thought, yeah, really, who is this person speaking? And who is this so-called doctor in South Korea? It just sounded a little weird. I didn't believe it necessarily, although I couldn't help holding my breath for those 30 seconds. But I thought, yeah, right, okay, probably not true. I didn't pass it on. The second one, though, is that tweet there on the left-hand side. Now, this guy here, Olivier Véran, he was the French health minister at the time, on the 14th of March, 2020. And he, I'll just quickly translate it in case you don't speak French. He says, taking anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, cortisone, could be an aggravating factor in the infection, talking about COVID, right? In case of fever, take paracetamol. If you're already taking anti-inflammatories, or if you're doubtful or worried about it, get some advice from your doctor. So this is the French Minister of Health. I mean, pretty much everybody believed that one. It turned out not to be true, though, interestingly. There was no scientific evidence for this. I've put a little link just underneath here because subsequently a study was done. It appeared in several newspapers saying, this is not true, folks. But a study was actually done by a couple of students at a university here in Barcelona, coincidentally, looking into where this came from. How did it come to the point where the French Minister of Health is tweeting something that's not true? And it started as one of these fake voice notes, pretty much like the one that I received in Germany, and then it spread. And as soon as it was given this kind of high profile attention, and people of course believed the health minister, suddenly it was everywhere. So it was reported on in newspapers as well as fact, with people not having checked whether it was true or not. So a real eye-opener, that one, I think. Then the one on the right there, you may have heard that one too when it happened, that apparently Amazon was not going to be delivering your pizza anymore, and the whole planet went into meltdown. So you might have heard about that, but it wasn't true either. It was one of those fake pieces of fake news, again being shared very widely via social media. Okay, here are another couple that I quite like. So you probably heard about this one as well, the toilet paper rush in the early days of lockdown. And there we have a Costco warehouse. And then there was this, you can read this on the right here, but basically that your toilet paper should be sent back because it was contaminated with COVID and so on. So here again, obviously this was not true, but it was again passed around via social media, people passing on a lot of this fake stuff. And in those early days, people were very confused by all of this. Yes, I will try to speak a little bit more slowly. Apologies, I get a bit carried away. Here are some statements based on those images that I just shared with you. The first one relates to that audio message that I received. The second one is that toilet paper hoax from Costco. This one we haven't looked at, but it was reported as a real event. And then we have the fourth one, which is the French minister's statement via Twitter. And then the fifth one about the Amazon deliveries. And all of these are false. So again, you can see how you can turn this into a classroom activity quite easily. You start with a series of statements, and then you get your students to research and find out whether they were true or not. The French minister's one is a very interesting case because it was widely reported as true at the time. All right. This is a fantastic site to send people to check out these rumors and false misinformation, disinformation that is circulating online. You can get some statements from here yourself and then get students in pairs to each take a statement and then research where it comes from, whether it's true, whether it's not true. So getting this kind of critical use of online information is absolutely essential. Of course, we're exposing English students to English reading practice at the same time, so it's a very valid language learning activity. This graphic was shared by the WHO, the World Health Organization, in 2020. So you can see how the audio that I was sent really falls into this kind of pattern. So as teachers, we can get our students to look at and check misinformation, but we can also teach them the strategies to avoid passing on misinformation. So once you've checked your sources, you've verified where it comes from, then you don't pass on fake news or misinformation. This is an important digital literacies, not just spotting it, but having the kinds of social behaviors that stop this kind of sometimes dangerous information. Okay, while we're talking about COVID, you probably got lots of fabulous memes during that time, and I just wanted to share 3 that I received on my own social media, which just made me laugh. So the top left one there made me laugh. The other 2 are in Spanish, from Spanish friends, and here they are translated. Oh, those just made me laugh so much at the time. So, of course, another activity is getting memes from students' own language and then getting them to translate. They can share their favorite memes. Okay. What we've been looking at then really over the last few activities is information literacy. As I said before, absolutely essential, the most important. Literacy lends itself very, very easily to English language classes. Reading, listening, researching, sharing, speaking. you can easily fit it into your English language classes. Before we finish though, I want to take a very quick look at remix. Remix literacy is my favorite. It's a very, very creative one. And to me, one of the best ways into remix literacy is through memes. So this meme, I'm sure you recognize it. It's one of the most famous memes of all time. It's been around for a very, very long time. If you're familiar with the history behind this image, please just type a few keywords into the chat. If you know where the image comes from, what country, what historical period, just put it in the chat there. Yes, World War II, Britain, absolutely. It was a poster that was created by the British government during the Second World War. It was never put up, it was never, exhibited publicly. But then in the early 2000s, a couple of copies of this poster were found in the north of England, and they were put in the window of a bookshop. And people quite liked it, and then merchandise started to appear. So T-shirts with this image and these words, or coffee cups, started to appear. There was something about it that people liked in the 2000s, even though it was in a different historical period now. So that happened for a while. It started to appear online. People shared it online as an image. And then this happened. This was, well, the first remix of the original meme that has been traced, which is wonderful. And of course, you can see how this is a remix. It takes the original elements and it mixes them up to create something new. We have the same lettering, the same number of words, the crown is upside down, we have a monochrome background. And this then created a huge amount of memes on the same theme. Here are some of my favorites. I'll give you a minute to look at them. Aren't those wonderful? Now, if you look at these memes, some of them are really quite complex. They require quite a lot of cultural and historical knowledge. Look at the one on the top left. This is referring to an entire political system. It's talking about communism, a political economic system. And the one next to it is also referring to an entire political economic system, right? It's talking about capitalism. So these memes often are quite complex. I mean, you need to have some kind of historical understanding, especially the one on the left, to recognize, for example, the icon. Some of them are obviously much simpler. Keep calm and blog on, or keep calm and cool Batman, reference to popular culture. And this one on the right, I quite like, the keep calm and fake a British accent. And my question to you is, why? Why a British accent? This is an interesting one. Why British? Why not a French accent or Italian accent or New Zealand accent? Why a British accent? Any ideas? Zoran says the British are calm. Yeah. Interesting. The Queen's English. They've got it together. Well, I think anybody in a petrol queue this week would disagree. Stiff upper lip. Yeah, Sophia there, she says stiff upper lip. There are many ways to interpret this meme, actually, and you're all coming up with all different ideas, which are equally valid. But my personal interpretation is the same as Sophia's, that it's the British accent. The British are considered to be, very stoic in the face of adversity. They don't get, they don't panic. They're always calm. And that's why, that's how I understand it. But there are many, many ways you can interpret this. So it's an interesting discussion to have with students here as well. There are all sorts of cultural assumptions behind memes that are a good road into talking about culture and intercultural stuff. Okay, I'm just going to very quickly share with you another meme. This is not for students. This is a well-known meme that teachers love. And you may have seen this one before. It's the said no teacher ever meme. And again, it follows a certain pattern. We have a statement, and then the statement is sort of the opposite. Said no teacher ever undermines the statement. So here are some of my favorites of this. These are old, exactly, Elise, but they are still hilarious. I'll let you read those. I think these have been around for at least 8 years. I'm sure you all identify with many of these. So I wouldn't use this with students, but in teacher training, yeah, it's a good laugh. So there you go. I mean, memes. So of course, the next stage would be to get your students to create a keep calm meme, or your teacher trainees to create a said no teacher ever meme. There are many free meme creator websites. Here they are. You can use some of them on your mobile phone, incredibly easy to use. So you may want to check those. Okay, I'd like to just finish with some words by Henry Jenkins. And he says, what students do in their online lives has nothing to do with the things they are learning in school. And what they are learning in school has little or nothing of value to contribute to who they are once the bell rings. Those are very, very harsh words. Worth keeping in mind is that he said this in 2009. So Henry Jenkins is an educationalist, teacher, but also works with educational technology. I think things are shifting. It's been slow. COVID has definitely had a huge impact in terms of putting technology, on the map, not just online teaching, but the fact that technology can support learning. If it's used well and judiciously, it can support learning. So things are changing, but I would argue that bringing digital literacies into your English language teaching is another way to make your students enjoy your classes more, and also make those classes so much more relevant to the world outside of your classroom. We do have a few minutes left for Q&A, and I think, Paul, you're going to moderate that. Oh, hang on, I'll put the Mime Creator websites back on. There we go.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you, Nikki. I really enjoyed that. It's very good.
You're welcome. Thank you, Paul.
I think everyone else looking at the comments enjoyed that as well. So yeah, I mean, a lot to sort of cram into 45 minutes. So obviously, sort of, I suppose you can say a whistle stop tour of digital literacies, but certainly kind of, and it's nice that you sort of focused on some of the key elements there. A couple of things that were sort of really interesting actually for me. Firstly, the one with the poll, with, I think surprised you as well, actually, the idea that teachers sort of mark themselves as around a sort of 3, or the majority mark themselves as a 3 in terms of digital literacies, but the students less so. I wonder if that's a couple of things, possibly COVID and teaching these students online and realizing that perhaps they're not quite as digitally literate as we might have thought previously, and also age group as well, I guess. I mean, I guess we can't sort of see what age groups people are teaching there, but maybe, I mean, I would imagine it's mostly sort of secondary, where you would expect, I think, students to sort of be more digitally literate. But then I guess I was sort of thinking and sort of trying to equate it with my teaching, which I don't sort of do now, but the idea, that if you're using technology in the classroom, then often a student will come along and fix it for you because they know how it works, but that doesn't really equate to being digitally literate, does it? So it's
exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's an important point. I mean, the idea that we think that our younger students are somehow more digitally literate. They've all got the equivalent of a PhD in TikTok or in Instagram, right? But show them something online or tell them to go and look at the drop bear, and they're going to believe it. They don't have the critical skills or the tools to be able to look at whether it's true or not. So this idea that the younger students are the more digitally literate they are is a fallacy. I think it's understanding digital literacies as being able to use technology, and that's not what it's about. It's got that social critical communicative angle that younger
Yeah.
students are often not so
Yeah.
proficient at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, as you know, I have a sort of 17-year-old, nearly 17-year-old son who spends most of his time looking at his phone. But you know, that's for YouTube videos or whatever. But it doesn't necessarily mean he'd be able to spot fake news. And I'm sure if I showed him the drop bear, he would think twice about going to Australia if that's what he was planning to do. You know, because he'd believe it. So it's, you know, it's interesting. The other thing I thought was fascinating, actually, and really important, and sort of brought home the idea of this being able to understand and discern between fake and real news, was the sort of the flow chart, the WHO, the World Health Organization flow chart, where the sort of touch points where someone doesn't share it, or someone, you know, I thought was, you know, really powerful, and just shows the importance of helping students to understand. Yeah, go back to it. Well, anyway, but yeah, the importance there of being able to kind of help students in that area. I guess, I mean, I just sort of wonder, maybe it's a question for people in the chat as well, but the idea that something like that, where you have a curriculum and you have to teach, and there are certain things that you have to do for exams, how do, maybe some advice from you, Nikki, but also a question to the participants, how do you, if you do manage to kind of bring in an element of a focus on digital literacies when there is such a sort of a dense curriculum perhaps to get through in order to pass an exam? That's
Yes,
the question, isn't it?
yeah, it's true. I mean, there's two ways to approach this, and our book, for example, Digital Literacies, you could either use that as a syllabus, and there have been a couple of research projects that have done this since the first edition was published. But the case of most teachers in the world, as you say, is that you have an externally imposed syllabus, right, or curriculum. It'll be through the education department or your school or your course book. But it's actually not difficult to slot an element of digital literacies always into your course book. So if you have, for example, a reading, let's say you have your unit on travel, right? I mean, find me a course book that doesn't have a unit on travel at every level, all the way up. It's not difficult to slip in some true false sentences there as a little warmer activity. So, you know, animals around the world, you could use some of my 6 statements there, take some of those, include the drop bear, and then do some online research, and then get students reporting back. So you could do that in class if you have access to all the students have access to technology, but if not, for homework. So in pairs, they need to research one statement and then come back and tell everybody if it's true or false and how they know. So those are, you know, helping them develop search skills, critical literacy skills, the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. I mean, sort of related to that is a question from Belal around the role of digital literacy on students' learning performance. I guess, I mean, you sort of answered that really there, I think, with that question.
Actually, I think Belal's question I see there, he's talking about student performance. Yes, it's not difficult for us, I think, to integrate some of the ideas I've shown you into our normal teaching. If we're communicative language teachers, then we do reading, you know, writing, listening, speaking. It's pretty easy to do. But performance, as Belal mentioned, performance is often, it's assessed through exams, right? If we are integrating an element of digital literacies into our classes, I think we need to relook at assessment a little bit. So if you're teaching your students to be, you know, check their sources online, and maybe they're writing blog posts and they're not over hyperlinking, to go back to that first example, they're being careful about the hyperlinks that they put into their blog post. They're using images that are Creative Commons licensed. So they're learning about copyright and the use of images, and, you know, quoting your sources, all of that stuff is happening. Then sure, we can assess their performance on what they've written, right? We can look at the language, we can say, oh, look at all those mistakes. Or we could look at the language on the one hand, but we also need to look at those digital elements. So what images did they put? Do the images support what they've written about? Are these Creative Commons sourced images? Are they sourced correctly? So all of those sort of elements now come into play if we're starting to work with digital texts. We go beyond language. Language is still a part of it because we're language teachers, right? but we need to also bring in those other elements, and arguably those elements are really useful for them beyond the classroom and in their future lives and in their own language as well. Assessment needs a bit of reframing.
Yeah, well, no, and I think it's COVID has kind of forced that. I mean, I know, and I'm sure you do as well, you know, from the various webinars we've run and the Facebook Lives, etc. So the big question that always comes up is how can I test my students? How do I assess my students without them cheating online? Well, you know, obviously maybe it's a question of looking at changing the way you assess and kind of, I don't know, using some of the tools. There's an interesting comment from Katie Simpson around about 152 in the chat. So it's just sort of saying instead of complaining about screen time, it's a good fallout from the pandemic in education. The educational world has embraced digital literacy as something important, and that technology is part of young people's reality. Maybe there was a generational disconnect to neglect that. So I mean, I guess, I don't know. It's I think certainly in schools that I know of here, state schools, the idea of having your phone out and using it, and it's an old thing, but you know, the idea of not using technology in the classroom is sort of quite traditional, and still is the case, I think, in a lot of places. Perhaps less so now after COVID, but the idea of, you know, I mean, I would assume, obviously, Nikki, that you're an advocate of using devices in the classroom for learning purposes, rather than the idea of, you know, put all your mobile phones into a basket at the start of the lesson and open your books on page such and such. It's not really conducive to learning. And I think maybe, you know, that's sort of taking effect, or you would sort of hope that's taking effect in education. Although I sort of see, again, to sort of use my own kids as an example, that now they've gone back to face-to-face teaching, it's almost like they've gone back in time. And you know, the idea of having your mobile phone out at any point during school hours is you know, punishable by whatever. Well, they take their phones away from them and confiscate them for 3 days. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's a question in there. It's more of a comment, I think. But that needs to happen now. I mean, I think there needs to be more integration of technology generally across mainstream education for it to advance. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, mobiles is a tricky one because it can provoke some very extreme reactions, right? Parents are often not happy about their kids using mobile devices. Teachers are especially worried about things like distraction, which is fair enough. But I think, I mean, you know, Gavin and I wrote a book together called Mobile Learning. So we do think there is a role for mobile phones in the classroom, but two important things to keep in mind. The first is classroom management. I mean, if you just leave your kids, you know, with their phones and they can sort of, you know, be sitting around with them in their hands the whole time, that's not going to work. So classroom management in terms of device management, you know, when they're not being used, they're face down on the table, you know, right here in front of you, where you can see, you can look around the room and you can see that their phones are face down on the table. So classroom management is one area, and that also needs to be discussed perhaps with the students in advance so that they understand the rules. Maybe you have some kind of contract or that you agree how it's going to be used. That's one area. And then the second one is task design. So tasks that are designed that are short and to the point and require the use of a mobile for a limited time. For example, you know, fake news statement. Check it out, everybody. You've got 5 minutes. Everybody's looking at it. Okay, stop. Phones down. So making sure that the task design requires the use of the mobile as well. I think without those two things, it's difficult to use them effectively. Yeah.
Okay. I've got a question actually that I can answer very quickly from Marcella about the tool that we use for the poll. So that's just, it's a Zoom, it's integrated into Zoom. So it's not a third party tool. We haven't sort of brought that in. It's just through Zoom, and you can set up polls in that way. So I'd recommend doing that with students if you have that, or if you're teaching on Zoom. A question from Facebook, actually, Angela on Facebook. How does time influence digital literacies? For example, a 40-minute session on Zoom, and then TV ads. I'm not quite sure what the question is. And I suppose it's time influence on digital literacies, maybe within the class. I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
Maybe Angela could just expand her question there in Facebook if she's still there. I'm also not quite sure I mean, digital
Yeah.
literacies is not something that you would do like I'm doing now, tell your students about. You would integrate
No.
it into classroom activities.
Yeah.
So maybe she's talking about
Yeah.
teacher training. Not sure.
Possibly. Yeah, Angela, if you could sort of expand on that, and then maybe we can answer that in Facebook. Sort of more or less run out of time now, I suppose. Well, so one really quick question. The book Digital Literacies, which is out next year, is it vastly different to how it was as a result of,
It's
sort of recent
probably
things?
well, it's got a theoretical part in the beginning. The first edition was published in 2013. It's now 2021. So the first chapter, which is the theory, has been updated. So it's got new research and stuff that's come out in the last, decade. And then also the second part is kind of very practical activities of the type that I've just shown you, although not these precise activities, although I think I have the keep calm activity in there, but not the others. So those have been updated, probably about, I'd say 50% of those are new, to look at new tools that are being used, a lot more use of social media, that kind of thing. And then the third part is application to the curriculum. And that looks a little bit at design-based learning as well, which is a new trend in our field. And then the final part is teacher development and how to use. So there's more on, what's available these days. So overall, I'd say the book is probably about 65 to 70% new. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, much more updated. Yeah, it was kind of those things where they say, would you mind updating the book? And you say, well, I'll do that over a couple of weekends. And a year later, it turned out to be quite a lot of work. But yeah, it's up to date.
Okay. And it's called Digital Literacy. Someone's just asking in the chat. Yeah, it's called, that's the title of the book.
Yeah, Routledge is the publisher. Yeah, Routledge.
Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. I think we've pretty much run out of time. Apologies for not being able to answer all of the questions, but hopefully we've managed to get through most of them. Nikki, thank you ever so much for that session, for giving it your time. I know you're also very incredible, and everyone we've had on is very busy. I would say thank you. I know you're busy, but it's because it's true. Everyone we've had this week is busy, and I know you are too. So thank you. Really appreciate you taking time out to come and talk to us about digital literacies.
Thank you. And thank you to you and the British Council, and of course to the audience for their wonderful contributions and for their questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to answer them all, but thank you, everybody.
It's all right. Yeah, no, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks those of you in Zoom, and thanks everyone on Facebook as well for your comments. I've sort of been keeping an eye on that, and I've been busy as well. So thank you to